You're useless. You just sit here and take up space. My daughter-in-law said it at the dinner table. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at my son. I simply stood up, walked to my room, and closed the door behind me. The next morning, I went to the bank. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The house felt different that night. Not unfamiliar. Not new. Just colder. The same dining room where I had spent decades feeding my family now felt like a place I had wandered into by mistake. The mahogany table, once filled with laughter, birthdays, Sunday dinners, now seemed too large for the three of us sitting there. Too empty. Too quiet. It had been 6 months since my husband passed. 6 months since I stood beside his casket, holding myself together because everyone said I was strong. 6 months since I learned that strength, in a house like this, often meant silence. I reached for my glass of water, my fingers trembling just slightly. Not enough for them to notice. Not that they were looking. Wade sat to my left. My son. 42 years old, broad-shouldered, successful, respected by everyone who met him. The same boy who used to run into my arms after school, who once told me I was the strongest woman he knew. That night, he couldn't even meet my eyes. His attention stayed fixed on his plate, as if the green beans required his full concentration. Between us sat Romy. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect control. She had always been composed, but tonight there was something sharper beneath it. Something colder, like she had rehearsed every word before she said it. You didn't even clear the table today, she added casually, cutting into her food as if she were discussing the weather. I blinked slowly. I wasn't feeling well this afternoon, I said, keeping my voice calm. It was true. Grief has a way of settling into your bones without warning. Some days, even standing felt like work. Romy gave a small shrug. We all have things to deal with, she replied. That's not really an excuse. Wade shifted slightly in his chair, but said nothing. Not a word. I looked at him then. Really looked. Waiting. Hoping. But he didn't turn. That was the moment something inside me didn't break. It went quiet. I cooked dinner, I said gently, more as a statement than a defense. And we appreciate that, Romy said quickly, though her tone carried no warmth. But cooking once a day doesn't really count as contributing, does it? Contributing. I repeated the word in my mind. 38 years of marriage. 38 years of raising a son, maintaining a home, supporting a husband through every success and failure. And now, I didn't contribute. My hands rested in my lap, folded neatly so no one could see them tremble. I see, I said. Romy leaned back slightly, studying me the way someone might evaluate a piece of furniture they were considering replacing. We've been talking, she continued, glancing briefly at Wade. And we think it might be time to make some changes. Changes. Another word that sounded harmless, until you looked at what it replaced. What kind of changes? I asked. Wade exhaled slowly, finally speaking. Mom, the house is a lot to manage. I waited. And we think it might be better if you considered moving somewhere smaller. Somewhere more suitable. Suitable. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. And this house, Romy added, her eyes drifting around the room again, has a lot of potential. We've been thinking about renovations. Maybe opening up the space, modernizing things. We. Always we. As if I were no longer part of that word. As if I were already gone. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Long enough to feel its weight. Long enough to realize something I should have seen coming. They weren't asking me to leave. They were telling me I didn't belong anymore. I picked up my fork, then set it back down. I'm a burden, I said quietly. Neither of them corrected me. That told me everything I needed to know. I stood up slowly, careful not to rush, careful not to show the heaviness in my chest. I think I'll turn in early, I said. No one stopped me. No one apologized. As I walked out of the dining room, I felt their silence. Follow me like a shadow. The hallway seemed longer than usual. The house, larger. Or maybe I had just become smaller inside it. I stepped into my bedroom and closed the door gently behind me. The room still smelled faintly of my husband's cologne. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand exactly where he had left them. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. At the photographs. At the furniture we had chosen together. At the life we had built, piece by piece. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to think something I hadn't dared to before. Not why are they doing this? But what don't they know? The answer came to me slowly. Not as anger, not as pain, but as something much quieter, something colder. I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of movement downstairs. Their voices, their laughter, their plans that didn't include me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since my husband died, I didn't feel lost. I felt certain. The next morning, I got up early, earlier than usual. The house was still quiet. I made myself a cup of coffee, the way I always did. 2 teaspoons of sugar, a splash of cream. I stood by the kitchen window and watched the light slowly fill the yard. Everything looked the same, peaceful, still, as if nothing had changed. But something had. I set my cup down carefully. Then I picked up my purse and my keys. And without saying a word to anyone, I walked out of the house and drove straight to the bank. The bank opened at 9 o'clock. I was already parked outside by 8:30. I sat in the car with the engine off, both hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the glass doors as if they might open early just for me. They didn't. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear things you usually ignore. The ticking of the cooling engine, the faint rustle of leaves, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. I had not rushed. I had made my coffee. I had washed my cup. I had left the house the same way I always did. Calm, silent, unnoticed. No one had come looking for me. That told me more than anything. They said the night before, at exactly 9 o'clock, the doors unlocked. I stepped inside. The bank smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Clean, orderly, predictable. A place where things were documented, recorded, proven. Not like home. A young teller greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I need to review some documents," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'd like to speak with someone about a property." She nodded and directed me to a desk near the back. A few minutes later, a man in his 50s approached. Gray suit, calm eyes. The kind of person who had spent his life dealing with other people's secrets. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Daniel Reeves. I understand you'd like to go over some property records." "Yes," I said. "A house." He gestured for me to sit. As I lowered myself into the chair, I noticed something strange. My hands were steady, not like last night, not like the past 6 months. Steady. "I'll need some identification," he said. I handed him my driver's license. He studied it briefly, then typed something into his computer. "Address?" he asked. I gave it to him. "The house. My house." He typed again, clicked, scrolled. The quiet hum of the office filled the space between us. Then he paused, just for a second. His eyes flickered slightly, not surprise exactly, but recognition. "You've been with us a long time," he said. "My husband handled most of it," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I see that." Another pause. Then he turned the screen slightly toward me. "Mrs. Carter, are you aware of how the property is structured?" I looked at the screen. Legal terms, dates, signatures. Some of it I remembered. Most of it, I didn't. "I know we bought it together," I said. "Years ago." "That's correct," he said. "But there were updates made later." "Updates?" He reached into a folder and pulled out a set of documents. Carefully, respectfully, as if they mattered, as if I mattered. "These were filed about 4 years ago," he explained. "Your husband transferred full ownership into a protected trust." I felt something shift inside me. Not shock. Not yet. Just attention. "A trust." I repeated. "Yes," he said. "One that names you as the sole beneficiary and controlling party." The words settled slowly. Sole beneficiary, controlling party. I stared at the paper. My husband's signature was there. Strong. Certain. Exactly the way I remembered it. He wanted to make sure, Daniel continued gently, that the property remained under your control, regardless of any future circumstances. Future circumstances. I thought about Romy's voice. "You're useless." I thought about Wade, sitting there, silent. I thought about the word we. "We've been talking. There's more," Daniel said. I looked up. "This trust includes a residency clause." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means anyone living in the property does so at your discretion," he explained. "They do not have legal claim. They are effectively guests." Guests. The word echoed in my mind. Guests in my home. I let out a slow breath. "So," I said carefully, "if I asked someone to leave, they would be required to," he said. "Legally." Silence filled the space between us again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Not cold. Clear. I'd like copies of everything, I said. Of course. He began organizing the documents, sliding them into a neat folder. As he worked, I watched his hands. Precise. Methodical. Certain. Just like my husband had always been. He set this up very deliberately, Daniel added. He was quite clear about his intentions. I swallowed. What did he say? I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated for a moment. Then, he said, she took care of everyone else her whole life. I want to make sure someone finally takes care of her. My throat tightened. For a brief moment, the room blurred. But I didn't cry. Not here. Not now. I took the folder from him when he handed it over. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant. Like holding something I had been missing without knowing it. Is there anything else I can help you with? He asked. I stood slowly. No, I said. This is enough. And it was. More than enough. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. The same street. The same parked cars. The same quiet morning. But something inside me had shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. They thought I had. Nothing. No income. No power. No place in that house. They thought I was dependent. Useless. I looked down at the folder in my hands. Then back at the road ahead. They were wrong. I got into my car and placed the documents carefully on the passenger seat. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there for a moment. Thinking. Not about what they had said. Not about how they had treated me. But about what came next. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. When I finally started the car, I didn't rush. I drove home the same way I always did. Turn by turn. Street by street. But when the house came into view, I didn't see it the same way. Not as a place I was slowly being pushed out of, but as something else entirely. Something solid. Something certain. Something that belonged to me. Inside, I could hear movement. Voices. Romy's laughter. Wade saying something I couldn't quite make out. Normal. Comfortable. Unaware. I stepped inside quietly, just as I had left. Set my purse down. Placed the folder gently on the kitchen counter. And listened. For a moment longer than necessary. Then I picked up my coffee cup from earlier. Rinsed it. Dried it. Set it back exactly where it belonged. Every movement slow. Deliberate. Controlled. They didn't know yet. Not about the trust. Not about the clause. Not about who actually owned that house. And I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Some truths are more powerful when revealed at the right time. And I had waited 6 months already. I could wait a little longer. When I walked back into the house, nothing had changed. That was the strange part. The same sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. The same clock ticked above the stove. The same voices drifted from the living room. Romy was laughing. Light. Carefree. Comfortable. As if the house already belonged to her. I placed my purse on the counter without making a sound. The folder stayed in my hand for a moment longer before I set it down beside the fruit bowl. Not hidden. Not displayed. Just there. Waiting. Wade, we should knock down that wall, Romy was saying. Open up the space. Make it more modern. I stood still. Listening. It would. Increase the value a lot, she continued. And honestly, the layout right now feels so outdated. Outdated. I glanced around the kitchen. The cabinets I had chosen 20 years ago. The tile my husband installed himself, one weekend at a time. The small crack near the sink we had always meant to fix but never did. Outdated. Yeah, Wade replied after a moment. That could work. Could work. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in pain. In recognition. I picked up the folder again and carried it with me as I moved through the kitchen. Not to show it. Not yet. Just to feel it. To remind myself. Also, Romy added, lowering her voice slightly, though not enough. We need to figure out a timeline. For what? Wade asked. For her, she said. A pause. Then, she can't stay here forever. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, one hand resting lightly against the counter. She's not going anywhere right now, Wade said, but there was no strength behind it. No conviction. Wade, Romy sighed, be realistic. This isn't sustainable. That word again. Sustainable. She doesn't contribute, Romy continued. And we have plans. A future. We can't keep putting everything on hold. Everything. I wondered, briefly, what everything meant. More space? More control? Or simply, more ownership of something that was never theirs? I stepped into the hallway then, making my presence known. Romy stopped talking immediately. Wade looked up. For a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Then discomfort. Mom, he said. You're back. I am, I replied. My voice was calm. Even. I walked past them slowly, placing the folder on the dining table this time. Deliberately. Not a word about it. Not yet. How was wherever you went? Romy asked. Her tone had shifted. Lighter. Polite. But not warmer. Productive, I said. That was all. She nodded once, though I could see the question forming behind her eyes. Good. Let it stay there. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Too quietly. Romy moved around the house with a kind of restless energy, opening cabinets, checking her phone, making notes about things she wanted to change. I watched her once as she stood in the doorway of the dining room, studying the space like she was already redesigning it in her head. Measuring, planning, owning. She didn't see me. Or maybe she didn't think she needed to. Wade stayed mostly in the living room. Laptop open. Emails. Work. Every now and then, he would glance in my direction. Quick. Almost guilty. But he never said anything. Not about last night. Not about what she said. Not about what he didn't say. I went about my usual routine. Folded laundry. Wiped down the counters. Watered the plants near the window. Each movement familiar. Each step practiced over years. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. I wasn't doing these things because I had to. I wasn't doing them to prove anything. I was simply observing. Watching. Understanding. By evening, the house felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way conversations moved around me instead of through me. Romy talked about paint colors. About furniture. About turning the spare bedroom into a home office. Our home office, she said at one point. I didn't correct her. I didn't react. I just listened. Dinner was quieter than the night before. No sharp comments. No direct insults. But the silence said more. Wade tried, once or twice, to start a conversation. How was your day, Mom? Fine, I said. That was enough. Romy barely looked at me. But I noticed something. Every now and then, her eyes drifted to the folder on the table. Just for a second. Curious. Uncertain. Good. After dinner, I cleared my plate. Washed it. Dried it. Set it back in its place. The same way I always had. Only this time, I wasn't invisible while doing it. I was patient. That night, I sat in my room with the folder open in front of me. The papers were exactly as I remembered from the bank. Clear. Official. Final. My name. My signature. My husband's. Everything in order. Everything undeniable. I ran my fingers lightly over the page. Not to check. Not to confirm. But to remember. He had known. Long before any of this. Long before the silence at dinner. Long before the word useless was ever spoken in this house. He had known. I might need this. Downstairs, I could hear their voices again. Low. Casual. Comfortable. They were still planning. Still talking about changes. Still assuming time was on their side. I closed the folder slowly. Set it beside the lamp. And leaned back in my chair. They thought I didn't know. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I had no control left. I let out a quiet breath. They were wrong. And soon, they would understand just how wrong they were. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I turned off the lights. I lay down. I closed my eyes. But my mind stayed awake. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. The kind that feels distant. As if every room had stepped a little further away from me. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the paint I had memorized years ago. My husband used to say we'd fix them next spring. We never did. There was always something more important. There always is. I turned my head slightly and looked at his side of the bed. Still untouched. I hadn't moved his pillow. Hadn't changed the way the blanket folded over the corner. Some people said that wasn't healthy. That I needed to move on. But they didn't understand. It wasn't about holding on. It was about remembering correctly. He had never made me feel small. Not once. Not in 38 years. Even on his worst days. Even when money was tight. When work was hard. When life didn't go the way we planned. He never made me feel like I didn't matter. I closed my eyes again. And for the first time in months, I let myself go back. It was a Sunday afternoon. Late summer. The kind of day where the sunlight comes in soft through the windows and everything feels still. We were sitting at this same dining table. The same one Romy had called outdated. He had a stack of papers in front of him. Neatly arranged. Carefully organized. That was always his way. What's all that? I asked him. He smiled. Just making sure things are in order. I remember laughing lightly. You've always been good at that. Not always, he said. But I'm learning. He slid one of the papers toward me. Read this, he said. I glanced at it, but I didn't focus. Legal language had never been my strength. You know, I trust you, I told him. I know, he said gently, but I still want you to understand. I remember that now. The way he looked at me. Not worried. Not afraid. Just certain. What is it? I asked. It's the house, he said. I looked up then. What about it? He leaned back in his chair slightly, folding his hands together. I've made some changes, he said. Just in case. In case of what? In case I'm not here one day. I shook my head immediately. Don't say that. We have to say it, he replied quietly. That's how we make sure everything is taken care of. I didn't like that conversation. I remember that clearly. I didn't want to think about a world where he wasn't sitting across from me. Didn't want to imagine this house without his voice in it. You'll always have this place, he said. I smiled faintly. I already do. He shook his head. No, he said. I mean, no matter what happens. No matter who says what. No matter who tries to make you feel like you don't belong here. Something in his tone made me pause. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. Warm. Steady. People change, he said. Situations change. And sometimes, the people we expect to stand by us don't. I frowned slightly. Wade wouldn't. I'm not saying he would, he interrupted gently. I'm saying, I want you protected. Just in case. I looked down at the paper again. The words still didn't fully make sense to me. But his voice did. His intention did. I've set it up so that everything is in your control, he said. The house, especially. In my control? Yes. I remember feeling confused. But it's ours, I said. It is, he nodded. And it always will be. But legally, I've made sure it's yours. I laughed softly then. You worry too much. Maybe, he said. But I've seen enough to know. It's better to prepare than to regret. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't read every line. I trusted him. Completely. Lying in bed now years later, I understood. Not just the words, but the reason behind them. He had seen something I hadn't. Or maybe, he had simply seen further. Downstairs, a door closed. Soft. Footsteps. Then silence again. I opened my eyes. The ceiling came back into focus. The present. The house. The truth. Romy's voice echoed in my mind. You're useless. I turned my head once more toward the empty side of the bed. And for a brief moment, I almost smiled. You always did think ahead, I whispered softly into the quiet room. Because now I knew. This wasn't just a house. It was a decision he made. A protection he put in place. A promise he kept. And tomorrow, I was going to honor that. The next morning, I didn't rush downstairs. I took my time. I made the bed the same way I always had. Smoothed the sheets. Adjusted his pillow just slightly. Then I got dressed. Simple. Comfortable. Nothing different. But inside, everything was different. When I walked into the kitchen, Romy was already there. Standing by the counter. Coffee in hand. Phone in the other. Scrolling. She didn't look up right away. Didn't greet me. Didn't acknowledge me at all. That had become normal. Wade was at the table. Halfway through his breakfast. He glanced up when I entered. Morning, Mom. Good morning, I replied. My voice was calm. Steady. I moved to the cabinet, took out a mug, and poured myself coffee. The same routine. The same movements. But this time, I was aware of every second. Every silence. Romy finally looked up. Just a quick glance. Then her eyes dropped. Not to me, but to the folder. Still sitting on the counter. Exactly where I had left it. What's that? She asked casually. Too casually. I picked up my cup. A few documents, I said. That was all. She waited. Just for a second. As if expecting more. When I didn't give it, she smiled faintly and went back to her phone. But I noticed. Her attention had shifted. Wade looked between us. Then at the folder. Then back at me. You went out yesterday? He asked. I did. Everything okay? Yes. Another pause. Where did you go? I took a sip of my coffee before answering. The bank. That got their attention. Not dramatically, but enough. Romy's scrolling slowed. Wade's posture changed slightly. Just enough to notice. The bank, he repeated. Yes. For what? I looked at him then. Really looked. The same way I had. The night before. But this time, I wasn't hoping for anything. I had something to check, I said. Silence settled between us again. But this silence was different. Not empty. Not dismissive. Tense. Romy set her phone down. About what? She asked. Still casual. Still controlled. But there was something underneath it now. Something sharper. I turned slightly, placing my cup in the sink. About the house, I said. That was enough. Wade sat up straighter. What about it? I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, then turned back to face them, just making sure I understand everything correctly. Romy let out a small laugh. Light. Dismissive. Well, there's not much to understand, she said. It's just a house. I met her eyes. For the first time, without looking away. No, I said quietly. It isn't. She held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then looked away first. Wade cleared his throat. Mom, if this is about what we talked about last night, it isn't, I said. And that was the truth. This wasn't about last night. This was about everything before it. I just realized, I continued calmly, that there are things I haven't looked at in a long time. Wade frowned slightly. What things? Paperwork, I said. Documents. Decisions your father made. At the mention of his father, something shifted. Just slightly. But I saw it. Romy crossed her arms lightly. Well, I'm sure everything is straightforward, she said. I mean, at the end of the day, it all becomes Wade's responsibility anyway. I didn't respond right away. I let that sentence sit in the room. Let it settle. Then I asked, does it? Wade looked confused. What do you mean? I tilted my head slightly. Does it automatically become yours? He hesitated. Just for a moment. I mean, eventually, yeah, he said. That's how it works. I nodded slowly, as if considering his answer. As if I hadn't already seen the truth in black and white. I see, I said. Romy picked up her phone again. Conversation over. In her mind, at least. But something had changed. I could feel it. The rest of the morning moved quietly. Wade left for work. Romy stayed home, moving through the house with that same sense of ownership, opening drawers, checking things, planning. At one point, I saw her standing in the living room again, looking around, measuring space with her eyes, as if she were already deciding what stayed and what didn't. I walked past her without saying anything. The folder still on the counter, still visible, still present. She glanced at it again, this time longer. Are you going to keep that there all day? She asked. I stopped, turned slightly. Yes, I said. She frowned. Why? I held her gaze. Because it matters. She didn't ask anything else. But I could see it now, clear as day. The certainty she had yesterday was starting to crack. Not broken, not yet, but no longer solid. And I hadn't even said anything. That afternoon, I sat by the window with the folder open again. Not reading, not checking, just letting it sit in front of me. They thought control came from speaking louder, from deciding faster, from acting first. But they were wrong. Control comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. And now, I knew everything I needed to know. That afternoon, I didn't leave the house. I didn't need to. Everything I needed was already there. Romy moved through the rooms like she always did. Confident, certain, opening cabinets without asking, rearranging things that had been in the same place for years, making small changes that, on their own, didn't seem important. But together, they told a story. She replaced the flowers on the dining table, not with fresh ones, with artificial ones. Bright, perfect, lifeless. These last longer, she said when she noticed me looking. I nodded. I'm sure they do. Later, I found her in the hallway, measuring the wall near the staircase with her phone. There's an app for this, she said casually. You can map out the whole space. The whole space. I watched her for a moment. How long have you been planning this? I asked. She didn't answer right away, just kept measuring. Planning what? She said finally. I didn't repeat the question. I didn't need to. By late afternoon, she had made 3 calls. I heard them all. Not clearly, but enough. Yeah, we're thinking of updating everything. Open floor plan. Better resale value resale. That word again. I sat in the living room, the folder resting beside me on the couch. Closed, but present. Every time she passed by, she looked at it. Not openly, not directly, but her eyes always found it. Good. When Wade came home that evening, the energy shifted again. Subtle, but noticeable. He greeted Romy first. A quick kiss. A quiet conversation near the door. Then he looked toward me. Hey, Mom. Welcome home, I said. He hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, can we talk? Romy didn't say anything. But she didn't leave either. She stayed right where she was. Listening. Of course, I said. I gestured toward the dining table. We sat. The same place as the night before. The same chairs. The same distance between us. The folder sat in the center of the table. Exactly where I had placed it. Wade glanced at it immediately, then back at me. What's going on? He asked. I folded my hands in front of me. Calm. Steady. Nothing, I said. He frowned. Mom, I waited. You went to the bank, he said. You keep saying it's nothing, but it doesn't feel like nothing. I nodded slightly. That's fair. He leaned forward. Then what is it? I looked at him, not as the boy he used to be, but as the man sitting across from me now, the man who had stayed silent. I'm just making sure I understand my position, I said. Romy shifted slightly in her chair. Your position? She repeated. Yes. Wade looked confused. What does that mean? I reached out and rested my hand lightly on the folder, not opening it. Not yet. It means, I said, that I should probably know exactly where I stand before any decisions are made. Silence. Romy crossed her arms. Well, we already talked about that, she said. We're just trying to be practical. I nodded. I remember. Then I don't see the issue, she added. I looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, without any hesitation. The issue, I said quietly, is that you're making plans based on assumptions. Her expression tightened. What assumptions? I let a small pause settle between us. About this house, I said. Wade exhaled. Mom, we're not trying to take anything from you. I didn't say you were, I replied. And that was true. They weren't trying. They believed it was already theirs. Romy leaned forward slightly. Then what are you saying? I held her gaze. Long enough for her to feel it. I'm saying, I answered, that before we talk about selling, renovating, or moving anyone anywhere, I tapped the folder gently. We should all be very clear about who actually has the authority to make those decisions. The room went quiet. Wade looked at the folder again. Longer this time. What's in there? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I leaned back in my chair. Calm. Unrushed. Information, I said. Romy let out a small laugh. Nervous this time. About what? I tilted my head slightly. You seem very interested. She didn't smile. I just don't understand why you're being so vague, she said. I nodded slowly. That's fair. Another pause. Then I said, because I spent a long time not understanding things myself. Wade's expression softened slightly. Mom, but I do now, I continued. I stood up. Slowly. Neither of them moved. I'm not making any decisions today, I said. Romy opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance to speak. But I will, I added. I picked up the folder, held it in my hands. And when I do, I looked at both of them, one after the other. It will be based on facts. Silence followed me as I walked out of the room. Not confusion, not dismissal, something else. Uncertainty. And for the first time, it wasn't mine. That night, the house didn't feel the same. Not because anything had changed, but because now, everything was clear. I stayed in my room longer than usual. Not hiding, not avoiding them, just choosing distance. The folder sat on my nightstand. Closed, but no longer just paper. It had weight now. Meaning, direction. I could hear them downstairs. Their voices were lower than before. Careful, measured. She's acting strange, Romy said. I didn't need to hear the rest. Wade answered something, but his voice was quieter, less certain. Good. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle around me. For months, I had been reacting. To grief. To loneliness. To the way they slowly pushed me to the edges of my own life. But now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking. The next morning, I woke up earlier than both of them. Before the house had a chance to fill with noise. Before their routines began. I got dressed, made my coffee, and instead of sitting in the kitchen, I took it to the dining room. I sat at the head of the table, my husband's chair, not out of defiance, not to prove anything, just because it was where I belonged. The folder was already there, placed neatly in front of me. When Romy walked in, she stopped, just for a second. Her eyes moved from me, to the chair, to the folder. Oh, she said lightly. You're up early. I am, I replied. She hesitated, then continued into the kitchen. But her movements were different now, less fluid, less certain. Wade came in a few minutes later, tie half done, still adjusting his sleeve. He saw me, then the chair, then the folder. He froze. Not completely, but enough. Morning, he said. Good morning, I answered. He didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment, as if deciding something. Then he took his usual seat. Not the head. Romy brought her coffee over, sat beside him. No one spoke. The silence stretched. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was controlled. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Set the cup down. I've been thinking, I said. Both of them looked at me immediately. That's good, Romy said quickly. Too quickly. I ignored the tone. I realized something. I continued. Wade leaned forward slightly. What? I rested my hand on the folder. Not opening it. Just there. I realized that I've been very quiet, I said. Neither of them responded. For a long time, I added. Romy shifted in her seat. Well, you've been going through a lot, she said. We understand that. I nodded once. I'm sure you do. A pause. But quiet doesn't mean unaware, I said. That landed. Wade's expression changed. Subtle, but real. What do you mean, he asked. I looked at him. Calm. Direct. I mean, I've been listening, I said. Romy's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. Listening to what? She asked. To everything, I replied. Silence. The kind that doesn't move. I let it sit there. Didn't rush to fill it. I've heard the plans, I continued. The renovations. The selling. The conversations about timing. Wade looked at Romy. Then back at me. Mom, we were just, I know, I said. And I did. You were planning, I added. Romy straightened slightly. Well, someone has to, she said. I met her eyes. Yes, I said quietly. Someone does. Another pause. Then I said, but planning only works when it's built on the right foundation. Wade frowned. What does that mean? I tapped the folder lightly. It means assumptions can be dangerous, I said. Romy let out a small breath. This again. I didn't react. I've spent the last few days making sure I understand things properly, I continued. Wade's attention locked onto the folder now. And he asked. I leaned back slightly. Unhurried. And I do, I said. Romy shook her head lightly. You're being very dramatic about paperwork, she said. I almost smiled. No, I replied. I'm being very careful. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't just tension. It was pressure. Building. I'm not going to argue, I said. Neither of them spoke. I'm not going to raise my voice. Still nothing. And I'm not going to explain everything today. That surprised them. I could see it. Then what are you going to do? Wade asked. I stood up slowly. I'm going to give you both time, I said. Romy frowned. Time for what? I picked up the folder. Held it in my hands. To think, I answered. They exchanged a quick glance. Think about what? She pressed. I paused. Just long enough. About what you believe is yours, I said. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard nothing. No argument. No dismissal. No laughter. Just silence. Heavy. Uncertain. And for the first time, it belonged to them. That afternoon, the house felt different again. Not quiet. Not loud. Just watchful. Romy didn't move through the house the same way anymore. She still opened cabinets. Still checked her phone. Still walked from room to room like she had something to do. But now she paused more. Looked around more. Thought before she spoke. I noticed it when she stood in the kitchen, staring at the wall near the stove. The same wall she had wanted to tear down. She didn't say anything this time. Just stood there, measuring with her eyes. Then walked away. Good. Wade stayed later than usual that day. Laptop open. Emails unanswered. His focus wasn't on work. It was on me. Every time I entered a room, he looked up. Every time I sat down, he noticed. Not openly. Not directly. But enough. That evening, they didn't bring up renovations. They didn't talk about selling. They didn't say anything about plans. But silence can say more than words. We sat down for dinner again. Same table. Same 3 chairs. No one rushed to speak. I served the food. Set the plates down. Sat in my usual seat. Not the head. Not yet. Wade cleared his throat. Mom, about earlier. I looked up. Calm. Waiting. He hesitated. Then, what exactly did you mean? Romy didn't interrupt this time. She just watched. I picked up my fork. Then set it down again. I meant what I said, I replied. That doesn't really explain anything, he said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Silence. Romy leaned back slightly. If there's something we need to know, she said, you should just say it. I met her eyes. Steady. Should I? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Wade looked between us. Mom, we're just trying to understand what's going on. I nodded once. I understand that, I said. Another pause. Then I added. But understanding requires the right question. That stopped him. What does that mean? He asked. I tilted my head slightly. It means you're asking what I know, I said. I let that sit for a moment. When maybe you should be asking what you assumed. Silence fell again. heavier this time. Romy's expression tightened. What are you implying? She asked. I didn't look away. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm observing. Wade leaned forward. Observing what? I looked down at my plate for a second, then back at him. The way decisions have been made, I said. Romy crossed her arms. We haven't made any final decisions, she said quickly. I nodded. That's true. But you've made plans, I added. No one denied it. I continued. You've talked about changing the house, I said. Selling it. Rearranging it. Moving people out of it. Wade shifted in his seat. We were just thinking ahead, he said. I know, I replied. And I did. Romy leaned forward slightly. Well, someone has to think ahead, she said. We can't just sit still forever. I looked at her. Calm. Unmoved. No, I said. You can't. She frowned. But thinking ahead, I continued, only works when you know where you're standing. Another pause. Wade's eyes moved slowly. To the folder. Still on the counter. Still visible. Mom, he said carefully, what's in that? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my glass of water. Took a small sip. Set it back down. Something important, I said. Romy let out a quiet breath. This is getting ridiculous, she said. I didn't react. If it's important, she continued, then just say it. I looked at her. Long enough for the room to go still. No, I said. That surprised her. I could see it. No, she repeated. No, I said again. Silence. Wade frowned. Why not? I leaned back slightly in my chair. Because, I said, you've both been very comfortable making decisions without asking me. Neither of them spoke. So I think it's fair, I continued, that I take a little time before explaining anything. Romy's jaw tightened. That doesn't seem fair at all, she said. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. It isn't fair, I added. A pause. Neither was last night. The words stayed in the air. Wade looked down. Romy didn't. That's not the same thing, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Because this wasn't about words anymore. It was about control. The rest of dinner passed quietly. No more questions. No more plans. But I could feel it now. Clearly. The certainty they had before was gone, replaced with something else. Doubt. After dinner, I washed my plate. Dried it. Set it back in place. Routine. Familiar. But this time, I wasn't invisible. I was being watched. And that was exactly where I wanted to be. Because the more they watched, the more they wondered. And the more they wondered, the more their confidence would break. I turned off the kitchen light, paused for just a second, then said, quietly, not everything is what it seems. I didn't wait for a response. I walked away, leaving them in the dark, with nothing but their own assumptions. The next morning, I didn't sit in the kitchen. I didn't wait for them. I didn't follow the routine they had grown used to. I prepared breakfast early, set the table, 3 plates, 3 cups, everything in its place. Then I went back to my room, not to rest, to wait. Timing matters. More than words, more than emotion. When I came back downstairs, they were already there. Wade at the table, Romy standing by the counter, talking in low voices. They stopped the moment they saw me. Good. Breakfast is ready, I said. Simple. Calm. They sat. Not at the same time. Not as naturally as before. I took my seat slowly. This time, at the head of the table. Neither of them said anything. But they noticed. The folder was already there. In front of me. Closed. Centered. Wade looked at it first. Then at me. Then back at it again. Mom, he started. I raised my hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough. Eat first, I said. He stopped. We ate in silence. The kind that stretches. The kind that forces people to think. Romy put her fork down halfway through. I don't understand what this is, she said. I didn't look up. What is what? I asked. This, she said, gesturing toward the table. The silence. The attitude. The whatever this is. I nodded slightly. You don't have to understand it, I said. She let out a short breath. That's convenient. Wade shifted in his seat. Romy, no, she said, cutting him off. If there's something going on, I'd like to know. I looked up then, directly at her. You would? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. I held her gaze. Then asked the right question. Silence. Wade frowned. What does that mean? I reached forward and placed my hand on the folder. You've both been asking what's in here, I said. Neither of them spoke. But that's not the question that matters. Romy leaned forward slightly. Then what is? I paused, just long enough. The question is, I said quietly, why you assumed you didn't need to know before. That hit. Wade looked down. Romy didn't. We didn't assume anything, she said quickly. I tilted my head. No, I asked. Her jaw tightened. We were being practical, she replied. I nodded. Yes, I said. You were. Another pause. Planning renovations, I continued. Talking about selling. Deciding who stays and who leaves. Wade exhaled slowly. Mom, we were just, I know, I said again. And I did. You were making decisions, I added. Silence. Romy crossed her arms. Well, someone has to make them. I almost smiled. Yes, I said. Someone does. I opened the folder. Slowly. The sound of paper shifting filled the room. Wade leaned forward. Romy didn't move, but her eyes stayed fixed. I pulled out a single document, placed it gently on the table. Not pushed, not thrown, just set down. What is that? Wade asked. I looked at him. Something your father signed, I said. His expression changed. When, he asked. A few years ago. Romy leaned closer, trying to read. I didn't stop her. He made sure everything was clear. I continued. Wade swallowed. Clear about what? I slid the paper slightly toward them. About the house. Silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't move. Wade reached out, picked up the document. His eyes moved across the page. Slowly, then faster. What is this? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Romy leaned in beside him, reading. Her expression shifted, just slightly. Then again. This doesn't make sense, she said. I folded my hands in my lap. It does, I replied. Wade looked up, confused, uncertain. It says, he started, then stopped. I finished it for him. It says the house is under a trust, I said. Romy shook her head. No, that's not. And that I am the sole controlling party. Silence. Wade stared at the paper, then at me. What does that mean? He asked. I held his gaze. It means, I said calmly, this house isn't yours to plan. Romy sat back. That's not possible, she said. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it is. Wade looked between us. But, I thought, I know what you thought, I said. Silence again. Romy's voice came sharper now. So what are you saying? That we don't have a say in our own home. I looked at her. Steady. I'm saying, I replied, that this isn't your home to decide. That landed. Hard. Wade leaned back in his chair, still holding the paper. You're serious, he said. I am. Romy laughed. Short. Disbelieving. This is ridiculous, she said. We live here. I nodded. Yes, I said. You do. A pause. As long as I allow it. Silence. Complete. No one moved. No one spoke. The balance had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. And for the first time since my husband died. I wasn't the one being pushed out of the room. Wade didn't speak right away. He just stared at the paper in his hands, reading it again, then again, as if the words might change if he looked long enough. Romy didn't wait. This doesn't make sense, she said, her voice tighter now. There has to be something else. A clause. A condition. I didn't interrupt her. I let her speak. There's no way this just gives you full control, she continued. That's not how these things work. I folded my hands calmly. It is, I said. She shook her head. No, it's not. Wade finally looked up. Mom, why didn't you tell us this before? That question hung in the air. I looked at him. Really looked. You didn't ask, I said. Silence. Romy let out a sharp breath. That's not fair. I nodded slightly. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. It's not fair, I continued. But neither is assuming ownership of something that was never yours. Wade lowered his eyes again. The paper still in his hand. I thought, he started, then stopped. I didn't help him finish. Because I already knew. You thought it would pass to you, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. Romy stepped in quickly. Well, of course he did, she said. That's how families work. That's how inheritance works. I looked at her. Calm. Sometimes, I said. That word lingered. Not this time, I added. The room felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way the walls seemed to close in around the truth. Wade placed the paper back on the table. Carefully, like it might break. So what happens now, he asked. That question mattered. Not because he asked it, but because of how he asked it. Not confident. Not certain. Careful. I leaned back slightly. That depends, I said. On what? Romy asked quickly. I looked at her. On what you both choose to do next. She frowned. What does that mean? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood up. Slowly. Walked to the window. Looked outside. The yard looked the same. The same tree. The same fence. The same quiet street. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. It means, I said finally, still facing the window, that you've been making plans without knowing the truth. I turned back to them. And now you do. Silence. Wade rubbed his hands together. A habit he had when he was nervous. I remembered that. Are you asking us to leave? He said. The question was soft. Almost hesitant. Romy looked at him sharply. Wade. I raised my hand slightly. Not to stop her. Just to slow things down. No, I said. That surprised them. Both of them. I'm not asking you to leave. I continued. Romy let out a small breath. Relief. Too soon. But I am saying, I added, that staying here is no longer something you assume. The relief disappeared, replaced by something else. Uncertainty. Wade nodded slowly. Okay, he said. That's fair. Romy turned toward him. Fair, she repeated. He didn't look at her. It is, he said quietly. She leaned forward. No, it's not. We live here. We've built our lives here. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt loudly. I just said, no, that stopped her. You've lived here, I continued. A pause. There's a difference. Silence again. Romy stared at me, trying to find something. A weakness. A hesitation. She didn't find it. This is unbelievable, she said finally. I nodded. I imagine it is, I replied. Wade stood up slowly, pushed his chair back. This is a lot, he said. Yes, I agreed. He ran a hand through his hair, looked at me, then at the table, then at the floor. I didn't know, he said. I know, I replied. That was the truth. Romy stood as well, her posture tighter now, controlled. So what are we supposed to do? She asked. I met her eyes. Think, I said. She frowned. About what? I paused. Just long enough. About how you speak, I said. Her expression hardened. Excuse me. I didn't look away. You called me useless, I continued. The words were calm, but they didn't need to be loud. That wasn't, she started. It was, I said. Silence. Wade closed his eyes briefly. I'm not going to argue about it, I added. Another pause. But I am going to remember it. That landed. Not as anger. Not as revenge. As something colder. Final. Romy didn't respond. For the first time since I had known her. She had nothing to say. I picked up the folder. Held it in my hands. This house, I said quietly, was built with care. I looked at Wade. Your father made sure it stayed that way. Then I looked at her. And so will I. No raised voice. No dramatic exit. I simply turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard nothing. No argument. No laughter. No plans. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when everything changes. That night, no one spoke. Not after I left the room. Not during dinner. Not even when the lights went out. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It wasn't empty. It was heavy. I sat in the living room for a while, the folder resting on the table in front of me. Closed. It didn't need to be opened anymore. Everything that mattered had already been said. Upstairs, I heard footsteps. Wade's. Slow. Uneven. Back and forth across the floor. Romy's voice followed. Lower than usual. Not sharp. Not confident. They were talking, but not the way they used to. I didn't try to listen. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were trying to figure out. What changed. What they missed. What they got wrong. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. For months, I had been the one adjusting. The one staying quiet. The one trying to fit into a space that was slowly being taken away from me. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up at the same time as always. But I didn't wait for the house to wake up with me. I got dressed. Walked downstairs. Made coffee. Routine. Familiar. But when Wade came into the kitchen, he stopped. Not because of what I was doing, but because of how I was doing it. Calm. Certain. Morning, he said. Good morning, I replied. He hesitated, then stepped closer. Mom, can we talk? I nodded once. We sat at the table. Romy didn't come in right away. That was new. Wade rested his hands on the table, looked at them, then at me. I didn't know, he said. I didn't respond. I should have asked, he added. I watched him carefully. Not the words. The tone. Regret sounds different when it's real. I thought things were simple, he continued. They were, I said. That made him pause. Until they weren't, I added. Silence. He nodded slowly. I should have said something, he said. I held his gaze. Yes, I replied. Another pause. I'm sorry, he said. The words stayed in the air. I didn't rush to accept them. Didn't reject them either. I heard you, I said. That was enough. He nodded again. I'll fix this, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Will you? I asked. He hesitated. I'll try, he corrected. Better. At that moment, Romy walked in. She didn't look at me. Not immediately. Her eyes went to Wade. Then to the table. Then, briefly to me. Are we having a meeting? She asked. Her tone was lighter than the night before. But it didn't feel the same. No, Wade said. She crossed her arms slightly. Well, it feels like one, she said. I stood up. Slowly. No, I said. It's not a meeting. I walked past her. Toward the kitchen. It's just a conversation that should have happened earlier. She didn't respond. Good. That afternoon, things changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but in small ways. Romy didn't make any calls. Didn't talk about renovations. Didn't mention selling. She stayed quieter. More careful. Wade stayed home longer than usual. Helped with small things. Things he hadn't done in months. Carrying groceries. Fixing a loose cabinet hinge. Not grand gestures, but noticeable ones. I didn't comment. Didn't thank him. Didn't encourage it. I just let it happen. Because this wasn't about effort. It was about understanding. That evening, we sat at the table again. No one rushed to speak. No one filled the silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. After dinner, I stood up, collected my plate, walked to the sink. The same as always. But this time, Wade stood up too. I'll help, he said. I didn't stop him. Romy stayed seated. For a moment. Then slowly, she stood as well. No words. Just movement. Careful. Measured. As if every step mattered now. Later that night, I walked through the house. Room by room. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway. Everything looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. Not because they had changed everything. But because now, they knew. And once someone knows the truth, they move differently. They speak differently. They think before they assume. I paused in the doorway of the dining room. Looked at the table. The chairs. The space we had all shared. Then I said quietly, respect doesn't come from words. No one answered. They didn't need to. Because for the first time, they understood it. The house was quiet that night. Not heavy. Not tense. Just quiet. I stood in the dining room for a long time. Long after the dishes had been washed. Long after the lights in the hallway had dimmed. Long after their footsteps had faded upstairs. The table was clean. 3 chairs pushed in. Everything in its place. I rested my hand lightly on the back of the chair at the head of the table. His chair. For months, I had avoided it. Not because I didn't belong there, but because I wasn't ready to sit in it alone. Tonight, I pulled it out. Slowly. And I sat down. The room didn't change. The house didn't shift. Nothing dramatic happened. But something inside me settled. I looked around the room. At the walls we had painted together. At the small imperfections we had never fixed. At the space that had held birthdays, arguments, laughter, and silence. It was all still there. Not taken. Not lost. Still mine. Upstairs, I heard a door close softly. Then another. No raised voices. No tension. Just awareness. That's what had changed. Not the house. Not the walls. Not even them, completely. Just the understanding of where everything truly stood. I sat there for a while longer. Not thinking about what had been said. Not replaying the past. Just being present. After a few minutes, I stood up. Walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water. Routine. Simple. But it felt different now. Not like I was moving through someone else's life. Like I was back in my own. The next morning came quietly. Soft light through the windows. The same gentle stillness. I woke up before the alarm. Out of habit. Got dressed. Walked downstairs. The house greeted me the same way it always had. But this time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to it. Wade was already in the kitchen. Standing by the counter. Coffee in hand. He looked up when I walked in. Morning, Mom. Good morning, I replied. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Not forced. Just real. I fixed the hinge on that cabinet, he said after a moment. I answered. Another pause. Thank you. He nodded. Didn't say anything else. That was enough. A few minutes later, Romy walked in. She didn't rush. Didn't avoid me. Didn't pretend. She just walked in. Good morning, she said. Her voice was quieter. Not weak. Just measured. Good morning, I replied. She hesitated for a second. Then, I moved the artificial flowers, she said. I glanced toward the table. They were gone. I noticed, I said. Another pause. I didn't think they fit, she added. I nodded. You were right, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. Not with confidence. Not with control. With awareness. She didn't apologize. And I didn't ask her to. Because some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood. We moved through the morning quietly. 3 people. Same house. But not the same roles. Wade left for work. Stopped at the door. Turned back. I'll be home early, he said. I nodded. All right. Romy stayed. But she didn't move through the house the same way anymore. She didn't measure walls. Didn't make calls. Didn't talk about plans. She cleaned. Organized. Moved carefully. Not like someone taking over. Like someone staying. That afternoon, I walked through the house again. Room by room. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway. Everything was still there. But it felt different now. Not because I had taken anything back, but because I had never lost it. I stopped in the doorway of the dining room again. Looked at the table. The chairs. Then I walked to the head of the table. Placed my hand on the wood. Steady. They thought I was useless, I said quietly. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to, because they no longer defined anything. I pulled the chair out again. Sat down. Not as a reaction. Not as a statement. Just as myself. The woman who had built this home. The woman who had stayed. The woman who had been quiet long enough. And finally understood something simple. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to know when to speak and when to let the truth speak for you.